The lone howl of a coyote pierced the dusk as Katherine Daley staggered along the dusty trail, her infant daughter whimpering softly against her chest. The April of 1878 had been unforgiving in the Colorado Territory, and Katherine's swollen eyes and hollow cheeks told a story of loss as profound as the vast landscape surrounding her. Just 3 days earlier, she had buried her husband beneath a crude wooden cross after typhoid had stolen him from her, leaving nothing but debts and hungry mouths to feed. "Hush now, Emily," she whispered, adjusting the threadbare blanket around her 3-month-old daughter. "Just a little further." Her stomach growled painfully, a reminder that she hadn't eaten in 2 days. Saving the last of their meager provisions for the wet nurse in town who had helped feed Emily when Katherine's own milk had begun to dry up from stress and malnutrition. The homestead they had so lovingly built together now belonged to the bank, and the remaining food had been claimed by creditors after Thomas's passing. The setting sun cast long shadows across the trail as Katherine spotted smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. Hope and desperation warred within her chest. She had heard tales of the ranch that lay ahead, Zephyr Ranch, owned by a man they called the Iron Cowboy, a reclusive figure who rarely ventured into town except for supplies and business. As she approached the modest yet sturdy ranch house, her legs trembled beneath her. Pride urged her to turn back, but Emily's hungry cries steeled her resolve. Katherine had nothing left to lose but her dignity, and that was a price she was willing to pay for her daughter's survival. The door to the ranch house swung open before she could knock, and Katherine found herself face to face with a tall, broad-shouldered man. His features were weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes, a startling shade of blue, reflected the last light of day. Dark hair curled from beneath his worn Stetson, and a well-trimmed beard framed a stern mouth that showed no immediate inclination toward smiling. "I don't take kindly to trespassers," he said, his voice deep and rough like gravel underfoot. Katherine swallowed hard. "I apologize for the intrusion, sir. My name is Katherine Daley. My husband. He passed 3 days ago. The bank took everything." Her voice cracked as Emily began to fuss louder. "I have nowhere to go, and my baby hasn't eaten properly in days." The man's gaze shifted to the bundle in her arms, his expression inscrutable. "Please," Katherine whispered, "I'm not asking for charity. I can work. I can cook, clean, mend anything. I just need enough to feed my child tonight." For what seemed like an eternity, the cowboy said nothing. Then, with a slight nod toward the interior of the house, he spoke words that would forever alter the course of Katherine's life. "You'll eat at my table tonight," he said, stepping aside to let her pass. "I'm Isaac Zimmerman. Most folks call me Zim." The warmth of the house enveloped Katherine like an embrace as she stepped inside, tears of relief stinging her eyes. The aroma of stew simmering on the stove made her dizzy with hunger. "Sit," Isaac commanded, pulling out a chair at a simple wooden table. "Food first, talk after." Katherine sank gratefully into the chair, cradling Emily close. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. I don't know how I'll repay you." "Zim," he corrected, ladling thick stew into a bowl. "And we'll figure that out tomorrow." He placed the steaming bowl before her, along with a chunk of fresh bread. "Can your little one eat anything solid yet?" Katherine shook her head. "She's only 3 months old. I've been struggling to feed her myself." The admission burned with shame. Isaac's eyes softened marginally. "There's a goat in the barn. Her milk might do for the baby until we can find better." Katherine looked up in surprise at his use of "we" and "until," words that suggested something more than just a meal for the night, but hunger overcame curiosity. And she began to eat carefully, savoring each spoonful of the rich stew. As she ate, Isaac busied himself around the kitchen, his movements efficient and practiced. For a bachelor, he kept a tidy home. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace along one wall. A hallway presumably led to bedrooms, and the furnishings, while simple, were well crafted. "How long have you been on the trail?" Isaac asked, breaking the silence. "Since this morning," Katherine replied between bites. "We lived about 10 miles east, a small homestead near Cottonwood Creek." "Daley," Isaac said thoughtfully. "Thomas Daley's widow." Katherine nodded, surprised. "You knew him?" "Of him. Heard he was a decent man." Isaac poured coffee into 2 mugs, placing one before her. Tough luck, typhoid. Too many good people lost to it. The simple acknowledgement of Thomas's worth unleashed the grief Katherine had been holding at bay. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them, and she quickly brushed them away. "I'm sorry," she said, embarrassed. Isaac shook his head. "No need to apologize for grieving, Mrs. Daley." "Katherine," she offered. "Or Kate, as Thomas called me." Isaac nodded in acknowledgement. "Finish your meal, Katherine, then we'll see to your little one." True to his word, after dinner, Isaac led Katherine to the barn where a nanny goat eyed them suspiciously from her pen. With practiced hands, Isaac milked the animal into a clean jar. "It's not ideal," he said, passing the jar to Katherine, "but it's fresh and clean. We can dilute it a bit, make it easier on her stomach." Back in the house, Katherine prepared the milk as Isaac suggested, her heart lifting as Emily eagerly accepted the makeshift bottle, a small glass vial with a piece of clean cloth secured over the opening. For the first time in days, the baby nursed contentedly, tiny hands flexing with satisfaction. "She seems to like it," Isaac observed, his stern features softening as he watched the infant. "Thank you," Katherine whispered, meeting his gaze. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "No need for that kind of thinking now," Isaac cut her off gently. "What's done is done. We look forward, not back." As Emily's eyes grew heavy with satisfaction, Isaac showed Katherine to a small bedroom. "It's not much," he said gruffly, "but it's clean. It was my sister's room when she visited." The room was indeed simple, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. But to Katherine, it looked like heaven compared to the prospect of another night under the stars. "This is more than generous," she said, carefully laying Emily on the bed and surrounding her with pillows to prevent her from rolling. "I truly meant what I said about working, Mr. Zim. I won't be a burden." Isaac regarded her steadily. "We'll talk about arrangements in the morning. For now, rest." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Katherine?" "Yes?" "I'm sorry about your husband. No one should face such hardship alone." With that, he closed the door softly behind him, leaving Katherine to wonder at the kindness of this gruff stranger who had offered shelter when she needed it most. Morning arrived with the crow of a rooster and the soft babble of Emily waking. Katherine had slept deeper than she had in months, the security of 4 walls and a full stomach working magic on her exhausted body. She quickly tended to Emily, changed her into the cleanest of her few baby garments, and smoothed her own wrinkled dress as best she could. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Isaac already awake, tending to a crackling fire in the stove. The smell of coffee and frying bacon made her stomach rumble appreciatively. "Good morning," she ventured. Isaac turned, a flash of surprise crossing his features before he schooled them into his usual stoic expression. "Morning. Sleep well." "Better than I have in a long time," Katherine admitted. "May I help with breakfast?" Isaac gestured toward the stove. "Be my guest. Eggs in the pantry." They worked in companionable silence, Katherine scrambling eggs while Isaac finished the bacon and sliced fresh bread. It felt surprisingly natural, sharing the small kitchen space with this man she barely knew. Over breakfast, Isaac outlined his proposition. "I need help around here," he said matter-of-factly. "Ranch this size ought to have a cook and housekeeper, but good help is hard to find, and most women won't work for a bachelor." Katherine nodded understanding. Propriety was everything in these parts. "I can offer you room and board, plus $5 a month," he continued. "In exchange, you cook, clean, mend, garden whatever needs doing inside the house. Outside is my domain." $5 a month was a fair wage, especially with room and board included. Katherine would be able to save, perhaps eventually afford a small place of her own. "That sounds more than fair," she agreed, relief flooding through her. "When would you like me to start?" The corner of Isaac's mouth twitched. "Seems to me you already have." He nodded toward the eggs on his plate. "These are a sight better than my usual fare." Katherine smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Zimmerman." "Zim," he reminded her, rising from the table. "I'll be out with the herd most of the day. Make yourself at home. Take stock of what you need. We can ride into town for supplies tomorrow." After he left, Katherine explored the house properly. Though clean, it bore the unmistakable signs of a bachelor's residence, functional, but lacking the touches that made a house a home. The pantry was well stocked with staples, but fresh vegetables were scarce. She discovered a small garden plot behind the house, overgrown but salvageable. With Emily settled on a blanket in the shade, Katherine spent the morning pulling weeds and turning soil. The physical labor felt good after days of grief and uncertainty. Here was something she could control, something she could nurture and grow. By mid-afternoon, she had also swept the house, dusted the sparse furnishings, and begun preparations for supper. When Isaac returned, dusty and tired from a day in the saddle, the transformation of his home was evident in his widened eyes and raised brows. "You've been busy," he observed, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Idle hands do the devil's work," Katherine replied, quoting her mother as she placed a steaming plate of beans, bacon, and cornbread before him. Isaac's assessment of the meal was taciturn but appreciative. "Been a while since I had cooking this good," he admitted, sopping up the last of the bean juice with cornbread. "My mother made sure all her daughters could cook," Katherine said. "She claimed no man would marry a woman who couldn't feed him properly." "Smart woman," Isaac replied. After a moment's hesitation, he added, "How did you meet your husband?" The question surprised Katherine. Isaac didn't strike her as a man interested in personal histories. "At a harvest dance in Kansas," she answered. "I was 17, visiting my aunt. Thomas was passing through, working as a farmhand. He had dreams of having his own land someday." Isaac nodded. "And he brought you out here to the territories." 2 years ago, Katherine confirmed. "We were going to build something lasting." Her voice faltered. "But then the drought came last year and the bank loans and then the typhoid." "Life out here isn't kind to dreamers," Isaac said quietly. "Takes more than dreams to survive." "Is that why you succeed? Because you don't dream?" Katherine asked, curiosity overcoming her usual caution. Isaac's blue eyes met hers, something unreadable flickering in their depths. "I succeeded because I expect the worst and plan accordingly." He stood, carrying his plate to the wash basin. "We'll head to town after breakfast tomorrow. Make a list of what you need." That night, as Katherine nursed Emily with the goat's milk, she wondered about the enigmatic man who had taken them in. Isaac Zimmerman was not what she had expected, neither the charitable Christian savior nor the lecherous opportunist taking advantage of a widow's desperation. He was practical, fair, and kept his own counsel. But beneath his gruff exterior, she sensed something more, perhaps pain, perhaps simply the solitude of a man accustomed to his own company. Whatever his story, Katherine was grateful for the roof over their heads and the chance to rebuild her life from the ashes of her dreams. The trip to town the following day revealed another side of Isaac. In public, he was even more reserved, exchanging only the briefest pleasantries with shopkeepers and townspeople. Yet Katherine noticed the respect in their eyes when they addressed him as Mr. Zimmerman. At the general store, Isaac instructed her to get whatever she needed for the house and for Emily, adding baby clothes and cloth diapers to her modest list without comment. While she selected cooking supplies, he spoke in low tones with the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, occasionally glancing her way. "Mrs. Daley," Mr. Jenkins called as they were preparing to leave. "I was mighty sorry to hear about Thomas. He was a good man." "Thank you," Katherine replied, the familiar ache of grief tightening her throat. "If you need anything," the storekeeper continued, his kind eyes flickering toward Isaac, "you just let us know. The community takes care of its own." Outside, Katherine noticed the curious glances from townspeople, a young widow with a baby, in the company of the reclusive rancher. She could almost hear the whispers that would follow their departure. "Does it bother you?" she asked Isaac as they loaded supplies into his wagon. "The gossip that will surely start?" Isaac secured a barrel of flour before answering. "People will talk regardless of what we do. Best not to give it much thought." Katherine nodded, though she couldn't help but wonder what stories would circulate about them. A respectable widow wouldn't typically enter the employment of a single man, regardless of how practical the arrangement might be. As if reading her thoughts, Isaac added, "My sister Martha will be visiting next month. Her presence should quiet any wagging tongues." The mention of his sister sparked Katherine's curiosity. "You have family nearby?" "Denver," Isaac replied. "Martha's husband is a banker there. They visit a couple times a year." He helped Katherine onto the wagon seat, handling her as carefully as he might a piece of fine china. "She'll be pleased I finally hired proper help. Been after me about it for years." The journey back to the ranch was mostly silent, save for Emily's occasional fussing. Katherine found herself stealing glances at Isaac's profile, the strong jaw partially hidden by his beard, the straight nose, the lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he hadn't always been so serious. "You're staring, Mrs. Daley," Isaac said without turning his head. Heat rushed to Katherine's cheeks. "I apologize. I was just wondering how long you've had the ranch." 8 years, he answered, seemingly accepting her explanation. "Bought it with money saved from driving cattle up from Texas. Previous owner lost his sons in the war. Couldn't manage it anymore." "And you've been alone all that time?" Isaac's hands tightened imperceptibly on the reins. "I prefer it that way. Less complicated." The finality in his tone discouraged further questions, and they completed the journey in silence, each lost in private thoughts. Spring unfolded into summer, and with it, Katherine's presence transformed Zephyr Ranch. The garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. Inside, the house gradually took on the warmth and comfort of a home, curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt draped over the back of the chair by the fire, wildflowers in a mason jar on the table. Emily thrived as well, growing plump on goat's milk supplemented with mashed fruits and vegetables as she grew older. She learned to roll over, then sit up, her dark eyes so like her father's tracking Katherine's movements around the house. Isaac, initially awkward around the infant, gradually became more comfortable in her presence, occasionally allowing her to grasp his finger in her tiny hand or bouncing her on his knee while Katherine prepared supper. Katherine found an unexpected peace in the routine of ranch life. The grief of Thomas's loss remained, a dull ache that flared on quiet evenings, but the desperate panic of those first days had subsided. Here, she and Emily were safe, their needs met, their future no longer a terrifying void. Isaac remained something of a mystery. He spent long days working the ranch with his 2 hired hands, Pedro and Liam. Returning at dusk for the supper Katherine always had waiting. Their conversations over meals had gradually lengthened, though Isaac revealed little of his past or personal thoughts. Still, Katherine learned to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, the lines around his mouth, the rare occasions when his eyes crinkled with something approaching a smile. Martha Zimmerman's visit in June brought a welcome change to the household rhythm. Isaac's sister was his opposite in temperament, talkative, expressive, and warm. She immediately took to Katherine and Emily, cooing over the baby and expressing her delight at the improvements to the house. "I've been telling Zim for years that this place needed a woman's touch," Martha confided one afternoon as they shelled peas on the porch. "He's a good man, my brother, but stubborn as an old mule about some things." "He's been very kind to us," Katherine replied carefully. Martha's shrewd eyes assessed her. "Kind isn't a word many would use for Zim. Respected, yes. Fair, certainly. But he keeps people at a distance." She paused, then added more gently, "He wasn't always that way. The war changed him, like it did so many men." Katherine's hand stilled. "He fought in the war?" "Union cavalry," Martha nodded. "Doesn't talk about it much, but I know it haunts him still. And then there was Elizabeth." "Elizabeth?" Katherine couldn't contain her curiosity. Martha sighed. "His fiancée. They were to marry when he returned, but she took ill with cholera just weeks before he came home. Her death, it closed something in him." She glanced toward the barn where Isaac was visible, mending tack. "That's why I'm so pleased he took you and little Emily in. It's the first time in years I've seen him reach out to anyone." The revelation of Isaac's past losses cast his gruff manner and solitary habits in a new light. Katherine found herself watching him with fresh eyes in the days that followed, noticing the gentleness beneath his stern exterior, the way he unconsciously protected those in his care. After Martha's departure, a subtle shift occurred in Katherine and Isaac's relationship. Their evening conversations lengthened, occasionally stretching past Emily's bedtime. Isaac began sharing more about the ranch operations, seeking Katherine's opinion on decisions that affected the household. For her part, Katherine found herself looking forward to his return each evening, missing his steady presence on the rare occasions when ranch business kept him away overnight. On the anniversary of Thomas's death in early July, Katherine woke with a heaviness in her heart. She went through her morning tasks mechanically, her thoughts with the simple grave she had been unable to visit. Isaac, observant as always, noticed her subdued mood at breakfast. "Everything all right?" he asked, watching as she picked at her food. "It's been a year today," she said quietly, "since Thomas passed." Isaac was silent for a long moment. Then he rose, clearing his throat. "Take the day. I'll watch Emily." Katherine looked up in surprise. "You have work to do." "Nothing that can't wait." His tone brooked no argument. "Go, grieve properly. You haven't had the chance." Gratitude welled in Katherine's chest. Without another word, she donned her shawl and walked out into the summer morning. She wandered the property for hours, eventually settling beneath a cottonwood tree by the creek. There, with only the rustling leaves and flowing water as witnesses, she finally allowed herself to fully mourn, not just for Thomas, but for the future they had planned together, for the dreams that had died with him. When she returned to the house late that afternoon, she found Isaac on the porch, Emily asleep against his broad chest, his large hand protectively spanning her back. The sight struck Katherine with such tenderness that her breath caught. Isaac looked up, his eyes asking a silent question. "Thank you," Katherine said simply, understanding now what a gift he had given her, the space to honor her past without fear for her future. He nodded once, carefully transferring the sleeping Emily to her arms. Their hands brushed in the exchange. A fleeting contact that sent an unexpected warmth through Katherine's veins. That evening, after Emily was asleep, Isaac surprised her by producing a bottle of good whiskey and 2 glasses. "A proper remembrance," he explained, pouring a small measure for each of them. They sat before the fire, the summer night cool enough to warrant its comfort. Isaac raised his glass. "To Thomas Daley, a man who dreamed of building something lasting." "To Thomas," Katherine echoed, touched by the simple tribute. They drank in companionable silence. Then Isaac spoke again, his voice low. "He did build something lasting, you know, Emily. And you, the strength you've shown this past year, that's a legacy any man would be proud of." Tears pricked Katherine's eyes at his unexpected eloquence. "Thank you for saying that." Isaac stared into the amber liquid in his glass. "I understand loss, Katherine. The way it hollows you out makes you question everything you thought you knew." He took another sip. "But I've come to believe that how we rebuild from that emptiness defines us more than the loss itself." It was the most personal statement he had ever made to her, an offering of his own vulnerability that felt more intimate than any physical gesture could have been. "Is that what you did?" Katherine asked softly. "Rebuild?" Isaac's eyes met hers, the firelight casting shadows across his features. "I tried. This ranch, the work it gave me purpose when nothing else made sense." His mouth twisted in a wry smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But I think I built walls more than anything else." "And now?" The question slipped out before Katherine could consider its implications. Isaac held her gaze, something shifting in the depths of his eyes. "Now I'm not so sure those walls were as necessary as I thought." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Then Emily's cry from the bedroom broke the spell, and Katherine rose quickly to tend to her daughter. When she returned, Isaac had put away the whiskey and was banking the fire for the night. The vulnerability of moments before had been replaced by his usual reserve, yet something had undeniably changed between them, a door cracked open that neither was quite ready to walk through. August brought scorching heat and the busiest time of the ranching year. Isaac and his men worked from dawn until well after dusk, moving cattle to better grazing, repairing fences, and preparing for the fall roundup. Katherine's days were equally full with preserving the garden's bounty, mending work clothes, and caring for a now crawling Emily, who seemed determined to explore every inch of the ranch house. Despite their busy schedules, Isaac made a point of spending time with Emily each evening, letting her pull herself up on his pants leg or reading to her from the newspaper in his deep, rumbling voice. The baby had taken to reaching for him whenever he entered a room, babbling happily when he obliged by lifting her into his strong arms. "She's fond of you," Katherine observed one evening as Isaac patiently let Emily investigate the buttons on his shirt. "She's easy to be fond of," he replied, a genuine smile softening his features as Emily grabbed his beard. "Reminds me of Martha's boys when they were small." "You're good with her," Katherine said. Some men don't have the patience for babies. Isaac gently disentangled Emily's fingers from his beard. Children are honest. They don't pretend to be something they're not. His eyes met Katherine's. It's refreshing after dealing with most adults. The comment revealed more about Isaac's view of the world than he perhaps intended, and Katherine found herself wondering again about the experiences that had shaped him. Their comfortable routine was disrupted in late August when a sudden summer storm turned the usually placid creek into a raging torrent. Isaac and his men spent a harrowing day rescuing stranded cattle and repairing washed-out sections of fence. When they finally returned to the house, soaked and exhausted, Pedro was supporting a limping Isaac. "What happened?" Katherine asked, alarmed by Isaac's pallor and the pain evident in his tight expression. "Horse slipped on the muddy bank," Isaac gritted out as the men helped him to a chair. "Foot got caught in the stirrup when I fell." Katherine quickly assessed the situation, sending Pedro for hot water and clean bandages. "We need to get those wet clothes off and see how bad it is," she said with practical efficiency, years of helping her mother tend to injured farmhands guiding her actions. Isaac dismissed his men with instructions to dry off and get some food, then allowed Katherine to help him remove his muddy boots and sodden clothes. She worked with clinical detachment, draping a blanket over his lap to preserve his modesty, while examining his injured ankle and the deep scrape along his ribs where he had been dragged before freeing himself. "You're lucky it's not broken," she pronounced after gently probing his swollen ankle. "But you won't be doing much riding for a few days." Isaac grimaced. "Can't afford to be laid up right now." "You can't afford to make it worse either," Katherine countered, cleaning the abrasion on his ribs with firm but gentle strokes. The task required her to lean close, bringing her face near his bare chest. She tried to ignore the solid wall of muscle beneath her hands, the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. "You've done this before," Isaac observed, watching her work with steady eyes. "My mother was the closest thing to a doctor our Kansas farm community had," Katherine explained, focusing on applying salve to the wound. "I learned from her." When she had finished bandaging his ankle and ribs, Katherine helped Isaac into a clean shirt she retrieved from his bedroom. The domestic intimacy of the task, her fingers working the buttons closed over his chest, smoothing the fabric across his broad shoulders, created a tension neither of them acknowledged. "Thank you," Isaac said gruffly when she had finished. "I'm not used to being fussed over." "It's not fussing. It's practical care," Katherine replied with forced lightness. "You'd do no good to anyone with infection setting in." For the next few days, Isaac was confined to the house, his frustration at his limited mobility evident in his restless movements and shorter than usual responses. Katherine adjusted her routine to accommodate his presence, including him in tasks he could manage from a chair shelling peas, peeling apples for preserving, even holding Emily while Katherine did the laundry. On the third afternoon, as thunderclouds gathered again on the horizon, Katherine found Isaac on the porch, staring broodingly at the distant pasture where Pedro and Liam were visible working with the cattle. "They're managing fine," she said, bringing him a cup of coffee. "They shouldn't have to manage without me," Isaac replied, accepting the cup with a nod of thanks. Katherine settled into the chair beside him. "Accepting help doesn't make you weak, you know." Isaac's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Depends on who you ask." "I'm asking you," Katherine pressed gently. "You've spent months helping us. Why is it so difficult to accept help in return?" The question hung between them as the first rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. Finally, Isaac sighed, his broad shoulders slumping slightly. "During the war," he began, his voice low, "I was captured at Gettysburg, spent 6 months in Andersonville." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "In a place like that, depending on others could get you killed. The men who survived were the ones who looked after themselves first." Katherine remained silent, understanding the rarity of this confidence. "When I came home," Isaac continued, "I found out Elizabeth had died waiting for me. My parents had lost the farm. Everything I thought I was fighting for was gone." His knuckles whitened around the coffee cup. "I decided then that the only person I could truly count on was myself. And yet you took in a stranger with a baby," Katherine observed quietly. "Why?" Isaac turned to look at her then, his blue eyes intense. "I've asked myself that question more than once." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something neither was prepared to name. In that moment, with the storm approaching and the world narrowed to just the two of them on the porch, Katherine felt a shift in her heart, a recognition that her gratitude toward Isaac had evolved into something deeper, something that both frightened and exhilarated her. The spell was broken by the first fat raindrops splashing onto the porch steps and Emily's cry from inside the house. Katherine rose quickly, using the excuse of the baby to retreat from the intensity of the moment. That night, lying awake listening to the rain pound on the roof, Katherine confronted the truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Isaac Zimmerman. The realization brought both joy and guilt-joy at the prospect of a second chance at happiness, guilt that she could feel such emotions so soon after Thomas's death. Would Thomas want her to mourn him forever? The question haunted her as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. By September, Isaac's ankle had healed, and the ranch settled into preparations for the coming winter. Katherine noticed subtle changes in Isaac's behavior. He lingered longer at meals, sought her company in the evenings, and began bringing small gifts from his trips to town, a length of pretty calico for a dress, a carved wooden toy for Emily, a book of poetry Katherine had once mentioned enjoying. One crisp autumn evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Isaac broke their companionable silence. "Katherine," he began, his usual confidence seemingly diminished, "your arrangement here, that is, your employment," he cleared his throat. "Your 6 months will be up soon." Katherine's heart stuttered. She hadn't been counting the months, hadn't considered that their arrangement might have an expiration date. "Are you dissatisfied with my work?" "No," Isaac said quickly. "God, no, that's not. I meant to say." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I wanted to know if you plan to stay on." Relief flooded through her. "If you'll have us, yes. Emily and I have come to think of this as home." Something softened in Isaac's expression. "I'm glad to hear that." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "This place feels more like a home with you both in it." The admission, simple as it was, represented a significant step for Isaac. Katherine reached over impulsively and laid her hand over his where it rested on the arm of his chair. "Thank you for taking us in that day," she said softly. "I don't know what would have become of us if you hadn't." Isaac turned his hand beneath hers, interlacing their fingers in a gesture that sent warmth spiraling through her. "I think perhaps you saved me as much as I saved you," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky, their joined hands a bridge between separate pasts and what might become a shared future. The first snow of the season arrived in early October, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Katherine woke to find Isaac already outside, clearing paths to the barn and well. Through the frosted window, she watched him work, his breath clouding in the cold air, his movements strong and purposeful. Emily, now nearly 8 months old, stood in her crib babbling, "Ma, ma, ma," and reaching for Katherine with chubby arms. "Yes, my sweet girl," Katherine cooed, lifting her daughter. "Let's get you warm and fed, and then perhaps we'll make something special for breakfast." By the time Isaac stomped the snow from his boots and entered the kitchen, the house was filled with the aroma of cinnamon and baking apples. Katherine had prepared his favorite apple flapjacks with maple syrup, and hot coffee waited on the stove. "Smells like heaven in here," Isaac said appreciatively, hanging his coat by the door. "A reward for your early morning snow clearing," Katherine replied with a smile, serving up a stack of steaming flapjacks. As Isaac sat down at the table, Emily reached for him from her makeshift high chair, declaring, "Ba, ba, ba," with enthusiastic insistence. "Is she trying to say something?" Isaac asked, letting Emily grasp his finger. Katherine's heart warmed at the sight. "I think she might be trying to say your name." "Zim is probably too difficult for her," Isaac mused, then looked thoughtful. "What about Pa?" "That's simple enough." The casual suggestion stole Katherine's breath. "Isaac." He met her eyes steadily. "I've been thinking, Katherine, about us, about Emily." He set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "I'm not a man of many words or grand gestures, but these past months with you and Emily have been the happiest I've known in years." Katherine's pulse quickened as she realized where the conversation was heading. I know it's soon after your loss, Isaac continued carefully, and I would never presume to replace Thomas in your heart, but I've come to care for you both very deeply. He paused, then added simply, I'd like us to be a family, properly. Though she had begun to hope for such an outcome, the actual proposal left Katherine momentarily speechless. Isaac mistook her silence for hesitation. You don't need to answer now, he said quickly. I understand if you need time to consider. Yes, Katherine interrupted, reaching across the table to take his hand. Yes, I would like that very much. Relief and joy transformed Isaac's usually stoic features. You're sure? Katherine nodded, tears of happiness blurring her vision. I've been afraid to acknowledge my feelings, thinking it disloyal to Thomas's memory, but I know now he would want Emily and me to be happy. She squeezed Isaac's hand. And you make us happy. Isaac rose from his chair and came around the table, drawing Katherine to her feet and into his arms for the first time. The embrace felt like coming home solid, warm, and safe. When he lowered his head to kiss her, it was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. Katherine answered by rising on tiptoe to deepen the kiss, her arms circling his neck as years of loneliness dissolved in the connection between them. Emily's delighted shriek broke the moment, causing them both to laugh as they turned to find her watching them with bright eyes, hands clapping in approval. Even Emily agrees, Isaac said, his smile transforming his face into something truly handsome. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with Martha and her husband journeying from Denver to stand as witnesses. Emily, dressed in a tiny white dress Martha had brought as a gift, remained contentedly in Isaac's arms throughout the simple ceremony, as if understanding the significance of the occasion that would make them officially a family. The winter of 1878-1879 was harsh, with blizzards that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. But inside the farmhouse, warmth and love flourished. Katherine and Isaac learned each other slowly, their nights filled with tender discoveries, their days with shared work and purpose. Emily took her first steps on Christmas Day, toddling unsteadily from Katherine to Isaac with a triumphant grin that both considered the best gift imaginable. By spring, when the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared in Katherine's garden, another blessing revealed itself. Katherine was expecting a child. Are you happy about it? She asked Isaac nervously when she shared the news, knowing how content he had been with just the three of them. His answer came in the form of a fierce embrace and tears he made no attempt to hide. More than I can say, he whispered against her hair. More than I ever thought possible. In November of 1879, Joseph Thomas Zimmerman was born on a clear, cold night with a midwife from town attending and Isaac pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When finally admitted to see his wife and newborn son, Isaac approached the bed with reverent steps, his usual confidence replaced by wonder. He's perfect, he breathed, carefully accepting the swaddled infant from Katherine's arms, just like his mother. And stubborn like his father, I imagine, Katherine replied with a tired smile. Emily will be thrilled to be a big sister. As if summoned by her name, a sleepy Emily toddled into the room, escorted by Martha, who had come to help with the birth. At 17 months, Emily was a chattering, curious toddler who had Isaac wrapped firmly around her little finger. Baby? She asked, peering at the bundle in Isaac's arms. Yes, sweetheart, Isaac confirmed, kneeling so she could see her brother's tiny face. This is Joseph, your baby brother. Emily studied the infant solemnly, then declared, My Joey, with such certainty that the adults